The loudest statement you can ever make to a man who is actively testing your boundaries or withdrawing his attention is to vanish completely from his reality without a single word of warning. You have been conditioned by modern culture to believe that emotional maturity requires you to explain your hurt, to outline your standards for the 10th time, and to text him a long, exhausting paragraph detailing why his lack of effort is unacceptable. In reality, this constant emotional labor does not inspire respect. It merely confirms to him that you are still sitting anxiously at the table, desperately begging for crumbs of validation. When you embrace the black cat energy, you realize that your absence is your ultimate power. And when a man chooses to step back or offer you mediocrity, you do not chase, you do not argue. You simply close the heavy door from the inside and let the cold, unyielding void of your sudden silence become the only mirror he has left to face. The most profound psychological shift you must make right now is to stop wondering if he likes you and start asking yourself if you actually like him and if he is qualified to fit into your world. You have spent far too much time sitting passively in the passenger seat of your own life, analyzing his micro movements, decoding his dry text messages, and waiting for his validation as if he were the prize to be won. When you finally internalize your sovereign worth, you realize that your energy is a luxury estate, and his consistency is the bare minimum required just to stand outside the iron gates. The moment you shift your focus from trying to be chosen to evaluating whether he is worthy of choosing, the power dynamic realigns itself instantly. You cease to be a predictable option waiting around for a text, and you become an analytical observer who is entirely unbothered by his temporary games. To protect your internal sanctuary, you have to learn to be completely turned off when he becomes distant or inconsistent, instead of letting his rejection trigger your internal anxiety. The average woman responds to a man's sudden distance by leaning in closer, trying harder, and suffocating him with warmth to win back a position she never should have had to negotiate for in the first place. A high-standard woman views a man's withdrawal not as a psychological challenge to be won, but as an immediate indicator of low-tier interest that instantly kills her attraction to him. If a man chooses to create space between you, you must allow that space to become a permanent canyon, viewing his inconsistency as an immediate turnoff rather than a mystery to solve. You do not mourn the loss of a man. You simply lose interest in someone who lacks the capacity to appreciate true excellence. Your silence is not a tactical game played to manipulate his reactions. It is the natural, dignified response of a woman who has too much respect for her time to waste it on stagnation. When you stop providing the emotional safety net for a man's indecision, you force him to experience the full, unvarnished consequences of his choices without your warmth to cushion the blow. He will notice the sudden drop in your availability, the lack of your texts, and the absolute stillness where your vibrant energy used to be. And that is where the psychological weight of his loss will settle. You are not hiding your feelings out of pettiness. You are simply withdrawing your presence because a sanctuary is never open to those who treat it like a public park. You move forward with a serene posture, knowing your worth is non-negotiable. When you refuse to engage in the exhausting cycle of chasing his attention, you reclaim the emotional support that you have been freely giving away to men who do not earn it. A man who behaves inconsistently is trying to see how much of your peace he can consume while offering the bare minimum in return, treating your affection as a cheap resource. The moment you stop reacting to his silence with panic and instead match his distance with an even greater, more permanent detachment, his entire strategy collapses. He realizes that he does not hold the remote control to your emotions, and that your happiness is completely independent of his text messages. This realization sends a shockwave through his ego, because men are accustomed to women who chase, not women who observe their mediocrity and quietly walk away. The illusion of connection often blinds you to the fact that your constant availability is actually lowering your value in his eyes, turning your presence into background noise. Human psychology is hardwired to take for granted anything that is given in infinite supply, without requiring any effort, sacrifice, or accountability. By always answering his last-minute invitations and accepting his vague excuses, you are teaching him that he can disrespect your time without facing any negative consequences. The black cat breaks this pattern by introducing scarcity back into the dynamic, understanding that a high-value resource must be guarded with absolute boundaries. You do not owe him an explanation for your sudden unavailability. Your missing warmth is the only notification he needs to realize he has crossed a line. Every single second you spend overanalyzing a man's inconsistent behavior is a second you are actively stealing from your own personal expansion, your career goals, and your financial growth. You become a satellite orbiting his unpredictable moods, neglecting your fitness routines, your creative hobbies, and the close friendships that actually pour back into your soul. This state of hypervigilance keeps your nervous system dysregulated, forcing you to check your phone with a racing heart, while your true potential sits completely neglected on the sideline. A sovereign woman refuses to allow an inconsistent man to become the main character of her mind, redirecting that intense focus back into her own life. You reclaim your cognitive power and pour it into building an empire that remains solid, regardless of who decides to stay or leave. You must understand that a man who truly values you will never create a situation where your silence is required to get his attention, because his investment will be clear from day one. When you find yourself strategizing how to make him miss you or how to text him to get a reaction, you have already lost your footing in your own sovereignty. The need to implement silence should come from a place of self-preservation, a clear decision that you are no longer willing to tolerate low-effort dynamics in your life. It is the moment you look at the relationship and realize that his lack of consistency is a complete turnoff, rendering him completely irrelevant to your future plans. You do not pull away to make him run after you. You pull away because you have finally opened your eyes to his ultimate mediocrity. Reclaiming your power means becoming comfortable with the temporary discomfort of the void, allowing the silence to exist without rushing to fill it with desperate communication. The nice girl conditioning will scream at you to fix the tension, to send a casual meme, or to check in on him under the guise of being friendly and understanding. You must resist this urge with every ounce of your being, recognizing that your compliance is the exact thing that keeps you trapped in the placeholder position. Let the silence stretch out between you like an open desert, and watch with a detached curiosity to see if he has the maturity to cross it with consistent action. If he does not, you have your answer without having to endure a single draining argument or an empty apology that leads nowhere. Are you ready to stop explaining your boundaries to men who are committed to misunderstanding them? And are you ready to unlock the absolute power of your dignified absence? Make sure you subscribe to this channel right now so that you never miss any of our strategies designed to help you build an unshakable black cat mindset. We are here to dismantle the nice girl habits that are keeping you anxious, ensuring you learn how to protect your peace and navigate dynamics with clinical precision. By joining this high-standard community today, you are making a public commitment to your own personal expansion, your career goals, and your total emotional freedom. Stay tuned as we step into the next phase of this strategy and look at how this manifests in the real world.
When Katherine walked away,
Katherine had been dating an executive named Marcus for 3 months, a man who initially provided the high-tier investment and clear communication required to enter her orbit. However, after their professional schedules became demanding, she noticed a subtle but calculated shift in his behavior as he began taking hours to reply to simple messages. Instead of text messages that facilitated concrete plans, he started offering vague check-ins and late-night greetings that required her to leave her schedule open for his last-minute convenience. The average woman would have immediately leaned into this sudden distance, checking her phone every 10 minutes and drafting long paragraphs demanding to know where she stood in his life. Instead of participating in that low-tier emotional labor, Katherine chose to observe his withdrawal with a detached curiosity, recognizing the classic red flags of a drainer testing her boundaries. On a Friday evening when Marcus unceremoniously canceled a dinner date with a generic excuse about being exhausted, she did not respond with anger, passive-aggressive remarks, or attempts to fix the situation. She simply sent a polite 2-word acknowledgement and immediately redirected her focus toward her own vibrant personal ecosystem, completely unbothered by his sudden exit. While Marcus likely expected her to spend the weekend waiting for his next move, Katherine was already changing into her shoes for her collective salsa class, ready to lose herself in the rhythm. The space that Marcus created with his distance was immediately filled with the warmth of Katherine's authentic life, rather than the anxiety of his potential loss. After her dance class, she met her inner circle of lifelong girlfriends at a nice restaurant, laughing over wine and discussing her academic projects, without a single mention of Marcus. When she returned to her sanctuary later that night, she poured a glass of water, turned on her favorite drama TV show, and fell asleep with a serene mind. By the time Marcus finally texted her on Sunday afternoon with a casual comment designed to test her availability, the dynamic had already fundamentally changed in her mind. She discovered that his sudden distance was not a puzzle to be solved with anxious texting, but an immediate turn-off that instantly erased her previous attraction to him. When Marcus reached out, he did not find an anxious woman waiting by the phone to validate his ego. He found the absolute, icy stillness of a sovereign entity who had already moved on. Katherine did not explain that his cancellation was disrespectful, nor did she schedule a heavy conversation to demand clarity about their future together. Her response was delayed, brief, and completely devoid of the emotional warmth he had previously taken for granted, forcing him to face the cold canyon of her sudden absence. She continued to excel in her lecture halls, enjoy her get-togethers with her friends, and master her salsa routines, completely erasing his presence from her daily thoughts. Her silence was not an act of warfare or a petty tactical game. It was the natural consequence of a high-standard woman who refuses to allow mediocrity to occupy a seat at her table. Marcus, accustomed to women who chased his distance, found himself completely disarmed by a woman who simply vanished into her own successful and happy life. He began to experience the psychological weight of his own poor choices, realizing too late that her warmth was a premium luxury that required consistency. Katherine did not need his closure because her self-respect had already closed the door from the inside, leaving him locked out of her sanctuary permanently. She remained the final authority of her world, proving that when a man decides to step back, the only correct response is to let him step into total obscurity. This clean break allowed her to preserve her cognitive energy for her students and her personal growth, rather than wasting it on a sinking ship. She didn't look back to see if he was following, because her life was already a masterpiece that didn't require his structural support to stand tall. By prioritizing her busy and fulfilling life over a man's inconsistent attention, she illustrated the core power of the black cat. She proved that when you stop centering men, their attempts to manipulate you through distance become entirely irrelevant. Marcus became a distant memory, a minor footnote in a chapter defined by her absolute expansion and emotional freedom. Katherine's story is the ultimate blueprint for the woman who refuses to be a placeholder, showing that the most elegant response to low-effort behavior is a beautiful, thriving life lived completely in your own terms.
The power of the closed door.
The moment you realize that your presence is an elite privilege rather than a permanent right is the exact moment the power of the dynamic shifts. Most women are trapped in a reactive loop, constantly measuring their worth by how quickly a man responds to their text messages or how much attention he decides to allocate to them on a Tuesday night. When you operate from that low-tier frequency of scarcity, you inadvertently grant an inconsistent partner full executive control over your emotional climate and your daily peace. The black cat paradigm demands that you dismantle this hierarchy immediately, removing him from the center of your universe and placing your own personal expansion back on the throne. You must learn to look at a man's withdrawal not as a painful wound to your fragile ego, but as an objective data point that reveals his lack of capacity for a high-standard connection. To successfully execute this level of emotional autonomy, you must cultivate what we call cognitive sovereignty, which means protecting your mental bandwidth from being hijacked by outside confusion. When a man begins to offer you mediocrity, your immediate psychological priority must be to withdraw your attention so cleanly that he is left standing in an absolute vacuum. This is not about executing a petty silent treatment or engaging in an immature game of who can last longer without checking their phone. It is about a genuine, internal shift where your attraction to inconsistency simply ceases to exist. You do not spend your valuable evenings pacing around your living room wondering why he became distant, because you are far too busy actively engaging with the rich ecosystem of your own life. Your energy is a premium asset, and you refuse to invest it in a venture that yields nothing but anxiety and emotional depletion. You must train your nervous system to view a partner's sudden distance as an immediate turn-off that completely devalues his currency in your eyes, rather than a psychological trigger that makes you chase him. The nice girl conditioning has deeply wired you to believe that when a man pulls away, you must perform harder, show more understanding, and offer additional warmth to prove your ultimate worthiness. This behavior is the psychological equivalent of putting a luxury asset on a clearance sale just because a low-tier buyer cannot afford the full cost of admission. A sovereign woman does not lower her price. She watches his withdrawal with a cold analytical detachment and immediately closes the iron gates of her sanctuary. If he chooses to step out of your rhythm, you must allow him to step all the way into total obscurity, recognizing that your time is far too magnificent to be spent negotiating for basic respect. True magnetic power is never found in the words you say during a heated argument, but in the absolute finality of your calm, collected absence when a standard has been breached. Men are fundamentally accustomed to women who provide endless emotional labor, women who will cry, scream, demand explanations, and offer countless chances to fix a broken dynamic. When you break this predictable pattern by responding to low-effort cancellation with a polite, brief acknowledgement and total silence, you completely rewrite the rules of engagement. You are signaling that you do not require his validation to feel complete, and that your life is already a highly successful masterpiece that operates beautifully without his presence. This quiet withdrawal forces him to face the unvarnished weight of his own mediocrity, realizing too late that his access to your light has been permanently revoked. Every time you choose to swallow your anxiety and focus on your own expansion instead of sending that desperate double text, you are building an internal fortress of self-respect. You must realize that human psychology is hardwired to take for granted anything that is given in infinite supply, without requiring any form of accountability or mutual sacrifice. By remaining constantly available to his last-minute whims and accepting his vague excuses, you are actively training him to treat your warmth as a low-cost commodity. The introduction of strategic scarcity is the only mechanism that forces an inconsistent partner to recognize the true value of what he is about to lose. You do not owe him an explanation for your sudden emotional distance. Your complete and total unavailability is the only notification he needs to understand your boundaries have been crossed. The illusion that you can inspire a man to treat you with excellence by showing him how much disrespect you can endure is the most toxic trap of the modern dating landscape. A man who faces no consequences for providing low-effort interaction will never wake up one morning and suddenly decide to treasure your infinite patience. He will simply continue to take everything you pour into his empty vessel while reserving his highest respect for the woman who demands excellence as a baseline condition for entry. When you choose to step into the identity of the black cat, you stop playing the role of the understanding placeholder who waits around for him to mature. You become the final authority of your own life, moving through the world with the unbothered grace of a feline that protects its territory from unwanted intruders. Your silence must become an act of deep self-preservation, a conscious decision to reallocate your cognitive equity back into your career goals, your fitness, and your financial freedom. When you allow an inconsistent dynamic to occupy the main stage of your mind, you are actively stealing the vital energy required to build your own personal empire. A sovereign woman refuses to let her professional performance, her creative hobbies, or her close friendships suffer just because a man lacks the maturity to communicate clearly. You must take that intense focus you are using to analyze his shifting moods and channel it directly into your own expansion and the cultivation of a brilliant life. You build an ecosystem so vibrant, so complete, and so deeply joyful that the presence or absence of a man becomes an entirely secondary detail. When you reclaim your sovereignty, you completely shift the dynamic from a place of desperation where you are trying to be chosen to a place of absolute evaluation where you choose. You stop asking yourself if you are doing enough to keep his interest, and you start looking at his behavior with an analytical eye to see if he is even qualified to stand in your presence. This mental pivot completely disarms the manipulative games of the drainer, because he can no longer use the threat of his distance to make you anxious or compliant. Your attraction is firmly anchored in your own standards, meaning that the moment he fails to provide consistent investment, your interest simply switches off. You look at his mediocrity not with anger or resentment, but with a detached curiosity before turning your back and walking away. The transition from a placeholder to a sovereign entity requires you to become entirely comfortable with the temporary void created by your total and absolute silence. The cultural conditioning will try to convince you that you are being cold, mean, or unreasonable by refusing to participate in a lopsided relationship that does not pour back into your soul. You must resist this narrative with an unshakable confidence, knowing that protecting your internal sanctuary is your highest and most sacred duty. Let the cold canyon of your absence stretch out between you and him, without rushing to fix the tension or offering an easy way back into your world. If he does not possess the high-tier maturity required to bridge that gap with consistent action, you remain entirely unbothered by his permanent departure. You are entering a phase of absolute emotional independence, where you no longer require external closure from a man, because your self-respect has already closed the door from within. If you are ready to stop guessing his intentions and want to master the exact psychological tools to identify red flags and handle disrespect with clinical precision, you need a tactical blueprint. To help you navigate these high-stakes dynamics and instantly reclaim your magnetic power in any relationship scenario, I have created a comprehensive strategic guide. You can gain immediate access to these advanced boundaries and step-by-step responses right now by clicking the link in the description below and downloading your copy of our premium manual. By taking this step, you are equipping your mind with the ultimate framework of sovereignty to ensure you never settle for crumbs again.
The fallacy of the endless paragraph.
The most catastrophic tactical error you can commit when a man begins to withdraw his attention is to launch into a campaign of aggressive clarification. You have been gaslit by conventional dating advice into believing that healthy communication means continuously explaining your basic human needs to someone who has already made a conscious choice to ignore them. When you respond to his sudden, icy distance by sending a massive wall of text detailing your disappointment, you are not displaying emotional maturity. You are handing him an instruction manual on how to manage your anxieties. You are essentially showing him the exact cost of your peace, signaling that he can completely disrupt your internal sanctuary and buy his way back into your life with a few hollow, low-tier apologies. This transparent eagerness to fix the tension instantly shifts the entire balance of power in his favor, transforming your genuine pain into a predictable performance for his ego. A man who behaves inconsistently is often conducting a subconscious stress test to see how much disrespect you will tolerate before you finally push your chair back from the table. When he cancels a date at the last minute, and you reply with a passive-aggressive remark, followed by hours of anxious checking, you fail his test completely. You are confirming to him that despite his mediocrity, your attention remains a cheap, readily available commodity that he can access whenever his schedule permits. You have effectively stripped your presence of all exclusivity, turning your vibrant warmth into background noise that requires absolutely no protection. You must understand that trying to negotiate for basic respect is the psychological equivalent of begging a thief to return what he has already stolen from you. If a partner requires a lengthy, exhausting lecture on why canceling plans on a Friday night is disrespectful, he lacks the foundational maturity required to occupy a seat in your orbit. By staying in the room to deliver that lecture, you are acting as his pro bono life coach rather than his high-standard romantic counterpart, wasting your valuable cognitive equity on his slow development. The black cat never asks a man to see her value. She assumes that if he cannot see it through the lens of his own intelligence, he simply does not possess the capacity to stand in her presence. Another insidious trap is the nice girl habit of overcompensating for his silence by doubling down on your own warmth, thinking your absolute loyalty will inspire him to change. You assume that if you are just a little more understanding, a little more supportive, or a little more flexible with your schedule, he will eventually realize what a magnificent prize he has. This is a severe delusion that ignores the fundamental hardwiring of human nature, which is designed to take for granted anything given in infinite supply without sacrifice. Your overinvestment does not make him feel grateful. It makes him feel comfortable, allowing him to coast along doing the bare minimum while you exhaust your vitality, keeping a dying dynamic afloat. This behavioral pattern quickly degenerates into a state of hypervigilance, where your phone becomes an emotional anchor that dictates the entire trajectory of your day. You find yourself checking his active status across multiple platforms, overanalyzing the dry punctuation of his last message, and scrolling through old conversations to pinpoint exactly where the energy shifted. This mental orbit completely drains your nervous system, pulling you away from your professional tasks, your fitness routines, and the hobbies that actually feed your soul. You are sacrificing your expansion on the altar of his indecision, letting an inconsistent individual become the undisputed author of your emotional reality, while your own goals sit neglected. You must recognize that your willingness to linger in the gray area of his inconsistency is the exact mechanism that prevents you from receiving the excellence you deserve. When you tolerate his vague, last-minute check-ins and accept his superficial excuses under the guise of being accommodating, you remove every single incentive for him to rise to a higher standard. He looks at your endless patience not as a beautiful gift of love, but as a confirmation that he can treat your life like a public park, where he can come and go as he pleases. A sovereign woman understands that boundaries are not lines drawn in the sand for him to look at. They are walls that instantly are built up the moment his investment drops below baseline. The fear of loss is the silent architect behind all of these common errors, convincing you that if you do not text him or if you walk away, he will simply forget you. This scarcity mindset forces you to perform for an affection that should be the natural byproduct of mutual admiration and consistent action. You are so terrified of the temporary void created by absolute silence that you prefer to choke on his crumbs rather than face the clean, empowering air of your own solitude. The black cat looks at the potential loss of an inconsistent man not as a tragedy, but as a highly successful house cleaning that clears space for high-tier alignment. You do not chase what is running away from you. You let it run all the way out of your reality. By continuing to offer your attention to a man who treats it like a low-yield utility, you are actively devaluing your own energy and presence. When your response to his distance is to check in on him to see if he is okay, you are masking your deep anxiety as casual friendliness. He is fully aware that you are not just checking in. He knows you are fishing for validation and attempting to bridge the gap that he intentionally created. This transparent move lowers your magnetic pull instantly, because it removes the tension and the mystery that only thrive when a woman is genuinely capable of walking away into the darkness without looking back. You must stop treating his coldness as an invitation to love him harder, and start treating it as an absolute disqualifier that renders him completely irrelevant to your future. The moment a man decides that he can go days without hearing your voice, or that his comfort is more important than your time, the evaluation process is over. You do not owe him a final conversation to explain why you are stepping back, nor do you need to wait for his behavior to worsen before you make your move. Your sudden, dignified unavailability is the most potent statement of your worth, because it proves that you value your own internal sanctuary far more than you value his temporary presence. The ultimate tragedy of these common errors is that they turn you into a perpetual placeholder, a woman who is occupied only until he finds someone who demands the respect you were too afraid to ask for. You spend months acting as his emotional safety net, absorbing his shifting moods and validating his ego, only to be discarded the moment his convenience changes. To break this exhausting cycle, you must be willing to let the relationship fail if it cannot survive the weight of your high standards. You must step out of the nice girl performance completely and embrace the calm, unyielding posture of a sovereign entity who knows that her absence is the only correct response to mediocrity.
Decoding the mind of the distant man.
To truly master the art of strategic absence, you must understand the underlying psychological mechanics that govern masculine behavior when faced with an emotional vacuum. Men are intrinsically hardwired to pursue and value that which requires effort, investment, and an ongoing negotiation of boundaries to maintain access. When you occupy a space with predictable warmth, you remove the psychological tension that fuels long-term desire and curiosity, effectively flattening the dynamic. The moment a man decides to pull back, he is operating under the assumption that your presence is a permanent fixture he can return to whenever his ego requires a quick injection of validation. By introducing an absolute and immediate silence, you completely shatter this projection, forcing his subconscious mind to confront the sudden, terrifying possibility of total and permanent loss. This phenomenon is beautifully mirrored in the pure nature of a feline archetype, an entity that understands intuitively that its affection is a luxury, not a public utility. A cat never performs for attention, nor does it sit by the door begging for acknowledgement when someone chooses to ignore its presence in the room. If a cat senses a shift in temperature, indifference, or a lack of welcoming energy, it does not complain or demand an emotional meeting. It simply stands up, turns its back, and vanishes into another room to enjoy its own company. This natural boundary setting creates an immediate psychological shift in the environment, causing those around it to instantly notice the sudden drop in aesthetic warmth and excellence. When you adopt this precise posture, you cease to be a reactive target and become a sovereign presence whose missing light carries an immense, uncomfortable weight. When you refuse to fill the silence with anxious communication, you trigger what psychologists call the scarcity heuristic, causing him to suddenly reevaluate your value based on your lack of availability. A man who behaves like a drainer relies entirely on the predictable cycle of your anxiety to cushion the blow of his own poor choices and low-effort behavior. When he cancels plans or withdraws and encounters an icy, unyielding stillness instead of the usual paragraph of complaints, his psychological equilibrium is completely disrupted. He is left alone in the quiet canyon he created, with no warmth to distract him from the cold reality of his mediocrity. This absence of your energy forces his mind to loop back to you, initiating a cycle of obsession as his ego desperately scrambles to regain the access he so carelessly threw away. You must distinguish between a facilitator, who pours into your sanctuary and respects your boundaries, and a drainer, who views your vital energy as a cheap resource to exploit for personal convenience. A drainer intentionally uses micro-withdrawals and calculated delays to keep you in a state of hypervigilance, knowing that an anxious woman is far easier to manage and manipulate. When you recognize this dynamic, your response should never be to educate him on how to treat you, but to apply the ultimate filter of absolute detachment. The black cat doesn't waste her cognitive equity trying to reform a low-tier investor. She simply categorizes his inconsistency as a fatal flaw that instantly kills her attraction. You don't pull away as a manipulative tactic to make him miss you. You walk away because mediocrity is an immediate turnoff to a sovereign woman. The psychology of desire cannot exist without space. Yet the nice girl conditioning has trained you to collapse that vital distance the moment tension arises in a relationship. By rushing to fix every awkward silence and over-explaining your boundaries, you are actively suffocating the very tension required for attraction to thrive over time. When a man creates space by being distant, you must view that space not as an existential threat to your safety, but as a magnificent opportunity to showcase your independence. You must allow that space to stretch out like an open desert, forcing him to experience the full, unvarnished consequences of his emotional withdrawal without your warmth to bridge the gap. If he doesn't have the internal maturity to cross that desert with consistent action, you have your answer without spending a single drop of energy. When you drop below this baseline and implement a total detachment, you establish the clean psychological filter that exposes whether a man is naturally hardwired to make your life easier or to deplete your sanity. A facilitator feels an intrinsic masculine urge to provide security, clarity, and continuous investment, meaning your high standards will naturally inspire him to step forward with concrete actions to protect his access. When a facilitator encounters your unbothered posture, his ego does not shatter. Instead, he recognizes that your warmth is an exclusive reward reserved for stability. A drainer, however, will instantly view your quiet independence as a direct threat to his superficial control, because he can no longer use breadcrumbs of attention to keep you anxiously waiting. The true nature of a low-tier drainer becomes undeniably clear during this precise evaluation phase, saving you months of emotional exhaustion. Because a drainer lacks the real maturity required to facilitate a high-standard relationship, your sudden unavailable posture will cause him to either vanish completely or strike back with passive-aggressive blame. He relies heavily on finding a compliant partner who will absorb his shifting moods, validate his ego, and constantly overinvest without demanding real reciprocity in return. When you utilize the power of the black cat and refuse to offer that emotional safety net, you force a severe crisis within his fragile pride. Your silence reveals that he has no real substance to offer, leaving him entirely exposed in his own mediocrity. Lifting the veil on these dynamics means you must treat his negative reaction to your boundaries as an immediate disqualifier that completely erases his value in your eyes. A facilitator makes your life easier by removing confusion, ensuring his text messages and real actions remain entirely aligned with your peace of mind from day one. When a man proves through his calculated distance that he is a chronic drainer, you do not launch an exhausting campaign to educate him on how to treat an independent woman. You never accept being a placeholder in a lopsided arrangement that actively steals your vital focus from your career goals and all the other aspects of your life. You simply close the iron gates of your sanctuary, recognizing his lack of investment as a fatal flaw. By remaining absolutely still, you allow the low-effort partner to execute his own permanent exit from your reality, without you dropping a single tear of frustration. A sovereign woman refuses to allow a drainer to occupy her mind for free, recognizing that hypervigilance is a severe form of self-sabotage that devalues her presence. You watch his withdrawal with a detached curiosity, understanding that a facilitator would never risk creating a permanent canyon between your hearts just to satisfy a temporary ego trip. If the relationship cannot survive the heavy weight of your absolute silence, you must possess the supreme confidence to let it shatter into pieces. Your unavailability is the natural consequence of a thriving being that refuses to waste its brilliance on stagnation. Ultimately, your emotional independence means you stop performing like a pick-me girl who loves harder in response to a partner's coldness, choosing instead to focus entirely on your own expansion. A man's actions during your direct absence tell you everything you need to know about his true capacity to protect, respect, and facilitate your long-term happiness. If he possesses the high-tier hardwiring of a facilitator, he will bridge the gap with clear communication. If he is a drainer, he will sink into obscurity where he belongs. You move forward with a serene posture and an unyielding self-respect, knowing that your sanctuary is locked tight against anyone who brings chaos. You reclaim your crown as the final authority, ensuring your light is reserved exclusively for a partner who makes your journey beautiful.
The Playbook for Silent Power.
The first step in executing the playbook of strategic absence is the immediate cessation of all emotional labor, the exact millisecond his investment drops below baseline. When he unceremoniously cancels plans, delays his responses for hours, or sends a dry text designed to test your availability, you must instantly freeze your warmth. Do not reply with passive-aggressive emojis. Do not type out a lecture on basic manners, and do not ask him for an explanation to soothe your ego. Your immediate response must be brief, polite, and completely devoid of any emotional hooks, leaving him with absolutely nothing to react to. You match his distance not as a petty game of retaliation, but as a clinical relocation of your valuable attention back into your own sovereign territory. The second phase demands that you ruthlessly clean your digital footprint and eliminate the habit of hypervigilance that keeps your nervous system anchored to his online presence. You must consciously stop checking his active status across communication platforms, resist the urge to view his social media stories, and remove his conversation thread from your immediate view. Every single time you peek into his digital life to see what he is doing without you, you are actively leaking power and keeping yourself trapped in a reactive loop. If his inconsistency has crossed the line into blatant disrespect, you do not announce your departure with a dramatic speech. You simply mute, archive, or disconnect his access to your daily reality. You create a clean, unyielding void where your vibrant energy used to be, forcing him to face the silence alone. The third step is the immediate and aggressive acceleration of your own personal expansion, ensuring that the void created by your silence is filled with authentic joy. You do not sit in your room staring at the wall trying to maintain the silent treatment. You instantly throw yourself into the rich ecosystem of your true life. This is the moment you double down on your fitness goals, invest your focus into your career milestones, and say yes to those dinners with your best friends. You make your presence so intensely scarce because your schedule is genuinely overflowing with activities that pour back into your soul and elevate your status. By centering your own happiness, his temporary distance ceases to be an anxious problem to be fixed and becomes entirely irrelevant to your day. The fourth phase requires you to train your mind to activate the automatic turn-off switch, the moment a man attempts to return with a low-tier, low-effort message. When he finally reaches out after days of calculated silence with a generic greeting like, "Hey, stranger," you do not reward his minimal effort with an immediate reply. You allow his text to sit in the digital canyon for hours, or even days, treating his message with the same detached indifference he showed to your presence. When you do eventually respond, your tone must be polite, brief, and completely closed to last-minute invitations or vague check-ins. You are communicating through your sharp posture that the gates to your sanctuary do not slide open for anyone who offers crumbs. The fifth step is the complete rejection of the modern trap known as seeking closure, understanding that your self-respect is the only final conversation you will ever need. The nice girl conditioning will try to convince you that you owe it to the relationship to have a heavy, emotionally draining discussion to officially end the dynamic. The black cat knows that a man who chooses to treat your warmth as a cheap resource has already given you all the closure you require through his objective actions. You close the heavy door from the inside, lock it with your boundaries, and move forward into your future without needing his validation or his permission to walk away. Your quiet, elegant unavailability is the final statement, leaving him completely locked out of your world forever. The sixth step focuses on maintaining your serene posture when his ego inevitably panics and he begins making grand promises to regain his previous access to your light. When a drainer realizes that his distance did not trigger your anxiety, but instead triggered your total detachment, he will often perform a sudden surge of high-tier investment. You must look at this sudden change in behavior with a cold, analytical eye, recognizing it as a desperate attempt to validate his own power rather than a genuine shift in character. Do not lower your guard or dissolve your boundaries at the first sign of a warm text message or an expensive dinner invitation. You require a prolonged, consistent track record of flawless execution before you even consider allowing an individual back into your life. The final step in this playbook is the permanent internalization of your worth as an exclusive estate that remains solid regardless of who decides to enter or leave your orbit. You must step onto the global stage every single day with the absolute certainty that your time, your attention, and your affection are premium luxuries that must be earned. When you operate from this frequency of total emotional independence, the games, the mixed signals, and the calculated distance of inconsistent men lose all power over you. You are no longer a reactive satellite orbiting their unpredictable moods. You are the undisputed author of your own reality and the final authority of your world. By mastering the strategic power of your dignified absence, you ensure that your energy is preserved exclusively for those who facilitate your expansion.
Reclaiming your crown.
As we bring this strategy to a close, you must understand that choosing to walk away in absolute silence is not an act of surrender. It is the ultimate declaration of your emotional sovereignty. The modern dating landscape is heavily saturated with low-tier dynamics designed to consume your vital energy while offering absolutely nothing but anxiety and stagnation in return. When you choose to step out of the nice girl performance and step into the unbothered posture of the black cat, you choose yourself. You are making a sacred, non-negotiable commitment to protect your internal sanctuary from the pollution of inconsistency, ensuring your light remains completely guarded. You no longer allow an erratic man to act as the main character of your mind, because your own personal expansion has successfully reclaimed the throne of your life. Your dignified absence leaves an indelible psychological footprint in the mind of an inconsistent partner, a cold void that no amount of cheap validation will ever be able to fill. While he sits alone in the quiet canyon created by his own poor choices, you are already moving forward with a serene posture, completely detached from the outcome of his confusion. You have proved to yourself and to the world that your warmth is an exclusive luxury that requires consistent, high-tier investment to remain open to anyone. You do not look back to see if he is following your steps, and you do not waste your precious cognitive equity mourning the loss of a drainer. Your life is a magnificent masterpiece that stands entirely solid on its own foundation, completely independent of external validation. The transition to this level of absolute emotional independence will initially feel uncomfortable to your nervous system, which has been conditioned to fix the tension and chase approval. You must lean into that temporary void with an unshakable confidence, recognizing that the silence is the exact space where your true power and magnetism are being reconstructed. Every single time you choose to match his calculated distance with an even greater, more permanent detachment, you are building an internal fortress of self-respect. You are teaching yourself that you are entirely capable of closing the door from the inside and walking away into the darkness without needing a single word of closure. You become an analytical observer of reality, navigating relationships with a clinical precision that protects your peace at all costs. Remember that a sanctuary is never open to those who treat it like a temporary public park, and your energy is far too magnificent to be spent negotiating for basic reciprocity. The moment you internalize this truth, the games, the mixed signals, and the sudden withdrawals of low-effort men lose every ounce of their psychological leverage over your life. You cease to be a predictable option waiting around by the phone, and you become a sovereign force that demands excellence as a baseline condition for entry. You move through the world with the unbothered grace of an elite entity, knowing that your worth is completely non-negotiable and your time is a finite resource. You lock your iron gates to mediocrity, ensuring your power is preserved exclusively for the high-tier alignment you deserve. Now, I want to hear directly from our high-standard community. Have you already experienced the incredible power of your dignified absence, or are you ready to close the door on an inconsistent man right now? Type the words "silent exit" in the comments section below to publicly claim your emotional freedom and share your own experiences with strategic silence to inspire other women in this circle. Your voice is a vital pillar of this movement, and by interacting with this video, you are actively validating your own commitment to personal expansion and absolute boundaries. Do not forget to subscribe to Black Cat Energy for more advanced strategies. Also, if you want to understand the deep psychological mechanics of why men get completely obsessed with the black cat, click on the card right here to watch the full breakdown where I explain it all step by step. Protect your internal sanctuary, maintain your unbothered posture, and I will see you in the next video.
Thank you so much for being here with me. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.